Probably because I didn't do that. I'm sure they can probably hear us now.
They'll tell us if we can. So I think that was very well said, Pete, but you might have to repeat it.
I don't think I could get those words again because I thought it was a pretty heartfelt.
Yeah. Well, sorry about that, Peter.
Can we make sure that everyone is hearing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Everyone.
So for everyone, I've just given a big eulogy on Danny Frawley, and you haven't got it, so I'll keep it brief this time, and I'll just say that we're all very, very deeply saddened, and I think that the thing that struck me was that the fact that it spans, the hurt spans across a number of generations, and my 10-year-old son, who was a huge fan of the Bounce, was deeply saddened, and didn't know Danny Frawley as a player, obviously, but that just shows the wide range of his appeal. So very, very sad, and significant condolences to his family.
Yeah, he was such a funny character, but I think with what's possibly been alluded to, and he talked about back in August that he's struggled with depression, that what you think of a person outer and how they present themselves is not necessarily what's going on behind the scenes. And if anybody is struggling, just make sure you get in touch with some people to help you out. Don't try and hide it away. But he is an absolute huge loss to the football community because he was doing such great work, not only at the AFL level, just with that personality of his and that bubbliness that he would show, but he did also a lot for local clubs, particularly around the Ballarat area, and knowing that he came from some very humble beginnings, and he was a great player when you watched him. He was a bloody hard defender to try and beat.
Yeah, no doubt he was. I've got a little bit of a problem with what people are alluding to at the moment. Not saying that it may or may not be right, but I think it.
Agree.
I think it probably just takes away from the general tragedy of it all, and I think those sorts of conversations are best left for when they're confirmed. But apart from that, you can't say anything. But what you guys have already said, it's just such a shock, and something that I didn't think we'd ever say on the CrowCast is rest in peace, Danny Frawley. It's just just one of those enduring characters, and terrible news.
So many polarising figures in AFL, isn't there? And I guess it's in so many ways that's what drives the industry. And if you had to identify one person who was never that, he was never ever polarising in terms of of anybody. He was one.
Yeah, that's exactly right. He, not that I think anyone from any other opposing team or camp or whatever would ever wish any ill on another an identity from another club, but Danny sort of transcended club allegiances, and he sometimes it's actually difficult to remember that he was a St Kilda player because he's just turned into this football ambassador, and really an ambassador for grassroots and for the everyman in footy, the supporter. And I think that's why so many people identified with him, just because he was just such a likeable bloke, and just there wasn't any pretension about him. It was just what you saw is what you got with him. And you're right, Peter. It's not something that is aligned to any particular club. It's just the footy community in general. Anyway,
here.
I suppose we can't really dwell on it. It's terrible, and I'm sure that it'll cast a pall over this week's probably the whole final series, to be honest with you. It from a point of view that we can't really ignore, even though it is very secondary, it will have some minor knock-on effect with what's going on down at Adelaide at the moment.
Yeah, I haven't seen anything released about
No.
What, if anything, is happening with that? So I guess we just wait and see. And
Yeah.
you would assume that it might be a little bit of a delay, but certainly nothing coming out of the club at the moment that I've seen. I would say one thing that I thought was on the back of that, which I thought was really, really positive, and that is a massive petition has been going round for the AFL to include the Golden Fist as a genuine award for defenders at the Brownlow evening. And
Yes.
I kind of got to thinking, they give out the Coleman medal, which is obviously for forwards, and we know that the Brownlow medal is for midfielders, and there really is nothing for defenders, is there? And so, I don't know. I don't know what anybody else thinks, but I actually thought that it was a pretty good idea because not only would it, be a lovely memory for Danny, but I think there's actually really genuinely space for the award.
I think there is too. I mean, some of my favourite players have actually always been defenders, and it's just, I think that's possibly one of the hardest positions to play, and it would be brilliant to finally have them recognised for all that work that they do. We know that there's definitely some egos amongst those the AFL defenders, which is quite amusing when you hear them spruiking themselves up. But definitely, I think there should be some way that they honour it, and to honour defenders. I think Danny would be absolutely chuffed.
No doubt about it. And, when you look at American sport and sport around the globe, we're one of the few professional sports that doesn't actually have a dedicated award for defenders. The best defensive player is definitely recognised in, the NBA and the NFL, and, defensive stats are seen, and rightly so, to be quite critical in terms of a team's performance. And yet, we focus on the playmakers and the goal scorers, and unless someone is ridiculously good in terms of a standout defender, they don't get a lot of accolades. And even then, it's often the Jakey Levers and the Tom Dudays who arguably have the least difficult defensive role, because even though they're in the defensive half of the ground, they're more of an attacking player anyway. But it's the blokes like Talia and Lukey Brown and Joke Kelly and those blokes that don't get a lot of accolades. And I recall, just a few years ago, Cole Chaney, who was probably unfortunate in terms of how his career ended with us. As
a premiership captain, Donkey's not here, but no. Premiership captain.
Yeah, but I mean, he was critical in some of our better wins, and the jobs that he did on blokes like Dangerfield and those sort of players that were stars of the competition. And yet Kyle would not be spoken about in the same breath as a Patrick Dangerfield, and yet he was able to nullify him. So, and the defenders like, who's the lad from Melbourne who always gets the better of Eddie Betts? The players like that, they don't really get the accolades. So I agree. I think it's well worth finally the AFL having a dedicated award for defenders, and I think who better to dedicate it to than Danny?
Yeah, that would be a great thing. But moving on, the AFL Tribunal news. There was really the major talking point was, of course, Toby Green from GWS, and I mentioned to Donkey through the week that, or early in the week, that there was always a chance that he would get off because they weren't playing Richmond or Collingwood. So if they'd been playing one of those two teams, he would have got 5 games. But they're playing Brisbane.
Pete, do you think they would have found the vision, a better vision regarding possible eye gouging?
Look, I've got no doubt that they would have. Look, I know this will sound, a little bit probably immature, but all I know is that if they've been playing, if GWS have been playing either Richmond or Collingwood next week, he would have got games. They would have found a way to get him games. You'll never convince me otherwise.
And what's the verdict? Does he deserve games?
I think he does.
Yeah, I think he was very lucky, particularly given his record.
No.
And when he's asked afterwards, are you going to change the way that you play, considering your record and in a final and you're advancing through, and this kind of happens, and he just kind of smirked and shrugged and goes, "Oh, we'll see." We know he can't change the way. He's been given so many warnings, and he just reverts back to form every time. I mean, he's a great footballer.
What's wrong with the way he plays?
It's when he gets a little bit close to the edge, and he will do things to try and actively hurt his opponent in ways that are unsportsmanlike.
Well, he didn't gouge Bontempelli.
Are we sure?
No, I swear right now, Nikki, if someone eye gouges you, you know about it. And Bontempelli wasn't eye gouged.
I think it might have been close to it, and he just didn't quite connect.
Close is not eye gouging. I mean, it deserved a rough conduct charge, absolutely, and he got the maximum fine. But I would have been mortified if he'd have got games. And to be perfectly honest with you, the whole Toby Green rule, the studs out rule, was an absolute joke. Studs out has been a part of football for 100 years. And you only have to go and have a look at some of the footage of some of the best marks taken by blokes like Fred Phillis and Ken Whelan and Tim Evans and those blokes back in the day, back in the 70s and 80s, and you'll see studs out quite regularly. I think Toby Green gets victimised, to be honest with you. And if you have a look at his record, there's not one striking charge. There's not one jumper punch in amongst all that. It's all stupid things. I think he's unfairly maligned, to be honest with you. I'd have him in my team every day of the week.
Oh, absolutely. No question about that. And look, to be perfectly frank, I didn't have I'll put my hand up. I didn't have a really close look at the footage. And I guess all I was alluding to was that, whether he should have got games or whether he shouldn't have got games, I guess my main position was the fact that it probably helped him that they're only playing Brisbane.
It's a fair call. That's a fair call.
I just think that would have been a determining factor in the end, and regardless of the merits of the actual thing. But anyway, he is free to play, so he'll be taking his place against Brisbane, and West Coast will play Geelong. So there's a couple of interesting semi-finals, and certainly the other bit of news, I guess, around is Chris Scott's been very much out in the media in the last day or two. Very much on the front foot, trying to, challenge the psyche of the players, and worried about that straight sets exit that is looming.
He's under the pump.
But didn't he? He tried to challenge them leading into that game, and it failed.
Make no mistake, Chris Scott is under the pump. There are 11 from 14 finals since he took over.
Yeah,
and
it's not good.
And the first year was basically he was coaching a team that was still running on the back of Mark Thompson.
Yeah, they were coaching themselves, and he's admitted they coached themselves. He didn't do a lot in that final series. They ran the first season.
Yeah.
I think definitely he should be under the pump. I know there's been a lot of rumblings from Cats fans that they're not happy with the performance that was put up. It looked like we were playing, that slow, stagnant ball movement, and we can't pass to a forward.
Well, they'll come undone against West. If West Coast turn up, I know it's in Melbourne, but if West Coast turn up to play and Geelong play the same way, they'll get absolutely smashed. And they've lost Duncan. Couple of other fitness clouds. West Coast looked alright, I thought. I reckon they're in big strife, Geelong. Straight sets again.
And they play the G very well. They've got a very good recent record at the MCG West Coast. So I would actually be surprised if Geelong get up on that one.
Yeah, well, I thought that the Cats would be in danger of going out in straight sets. And now it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest. And couldn't have a nicer team, I reckon.
Love it.
Not a big fan. Speaking of just going back on the Toby Green one, someone explained to me how what Green did was more or less dangerous than what Nick Natanui did to. That
was a bad one, I thought. I already thought that was a bad one.
He's thrown him into the fence.
Yeah.
like unceremoniously thrown him into the fence. Could have done a collarbone, could have dislocated a shoulder, could have been lacerated if the fence busted. Like, and they only got a $1,000 fine. To me, that was far more dangerous than what Toby Green did, and I reckon Nick Nat is actually quite fortunate to be playing this week.
Yeah, I think that he's for mine. I think Nick Nat is building himself a nice little reputation as being a pretty, he's had a couple of run-ins in terms of some of his actions, and I've seen a couple of his actions in the lower leagues as well when he was coming back from injury, and he could probably do well with cleaning up his game a little bit, I think, and that was a bad one. And also the interesting thing that I can't remember who mentioned it, but I did read or see somewhere that there was some talk about the fact that of his dreadlocks, and the fact that when he swings those dreadlocks, and that was actually what prompted the whole thing, that it actually slapped the dreadlocks, got Merritt in the eyes around the face area, and he kind of reacted to that. And so we're reading somewhere that in AFLW they can't, he wouldn't, you wouldn't be able to have those dreadlocks. They've got to be tied up or something's got to be done with them. And yet, but in the AFL, he's quite able to play with those dreadlocks and swing them around as he does.
You're actually not allowed to use hairpins in the AFLW in case they fall out and they land in the ground and they can hurt someone. They've got some ridiculous rule regarding the hair. But when I was actually playing basketball, that was the era they actually brought in the tying the hair down, because we used to use our ponytails as a weapon. You'd swing it around to create your own little bit of space. I mean, for me as a smaller player in netball, that was a way that I could actually get my opponent away from me. They were it is an interesting one regarding that, but you still don't bloody pull his hair. I mean, you just don't do that. From Merritt, it was stupid from Merritt. And I've had my hair pulled as well, and that really does hurt. So I can understand the reaction from Nick Nat, but you guys are right that he's exceedingly lucky. I don't think he realised the fence was there. It was just a case of that snap.
Yeah, but if Merritt's reacted to being whipped in the eye, then you can't excuse Nick Nat for reacting and not Merritt for reacting. And how many times has a bloke got games? How many times has a bloke got games for retaliating? Retaliation is no excuse either.
Yeah, but I didn't say I excused. I said I understand why he reacted that way, but I'm agreeing with you guys that they are both exceedingly lucky. I don't think Nick Nat actually understood that the fence was there. He was just trying to get rid of the bloke. But that's not an excuse. It's just understanding where he's kind of coming from. I actually do think, if they've brought in those ridiculous rules in the AFLW regarding the hair and everything else, so fair's fair. Do it to the men.
He is all I'll say is this: he is a massive, massive unit. He plays the game with very, very little care or regard, particularly and he invariably seems to get involved in things with much smaller players. So I'm not going to cast any aspersions on his character, but he's building up a bit of a record, and I think that he is a player that really does, given his size, he should be taking a lot more care. And that was a classic case on the weekend where he could have done some really, really serious damage to a much smaller player. And he used that outweigh to, almost, potentially cause serious injury. So he needs to, for me, everyone loves Nick Nat. Well, you know what? I reckon he should pull his head in.
Yeah. Now, Nick, I thought you'd be all over this. The new CBA for the proposed CBA for the AFLW, proposed for 2022. All right, let me read quickly. AFLW players will receive an initial pay rise of 21%, and the season will be extended to 12 matches by 2022 if the AFL's proposed collective bargaining agreement is signed off by the players. after months of negotiation. The AFL and the AFLPA, interestingly, the AFLPA negotiating on behalf of the women as well, have agreed
They
on
are
a proposed
members.
CBA. Well, I wasn't sure whether the women had their own players' association.
No.
They probably would have been excused for forming their own, but anyway. So 8 rounds in 2020, and in 21 and 22, 9 rounds and 3 weeks of finals. So they're doing. I think they're doing away with the conference system as well, which I think is a good idea.
They had to, because they got so much shit and flack, not only from the public but also from the clubs and the players regarding that, because it was completely unfair, and everybody in the system, even though it benefited our team, but we still understood how unfair it was, and we want a level playing field in terms of that, in order to garner the respect that those players want to get. I think they're still being a little bit too slow in increasing the numbers, because we're still going to have that problem of we've got less games and more teams. They're a little bit slow on that uptake, but I didn't expect anything better from the AFL.
Yeah. Just an answer to DSG's question on the chat. All the article says, mate, is it's a 21% increase in 2020, and then further increase of 10 and 11% for the following 2 years up to 2022, at which time the CBA expires, and that'll bring it into line with the men's CBA and the AFL media rights as well. So that'll have that all tied in. The top AFLW players, it is envisaged by 2020 will be getting paid just under 30 grand, and by 2022 the top players will be getting paid 36 grand for a 12 game season, so about 3 grand a game.
Wow, that's not too bad.
They do start in November.
Not bad.
So
not bad.
Pre-season, everything else.
Yeah. Vardy's asking about our episode 2 and 3 of Angela Pipoffs. We're just holding on to those. I didn't want to do it tonight, just in view of what's happened this week. And
yeah,
there's a section of our interview with Angela that really pertains very well to the AFLW. And I wondered whether perhaps we might actually even hold that off till closer to the time there. But I'll probably chat with you about that, Nick, at some stage.
We could do. It was an excellent discussion.
Yeah, it really was. And yeah, probably have more context.
Should I say, it was an excellent listen.
Yeah. But yeah, probably more context around the AFLW season. So we'll wait and see on that one. Yeah, so now the other thing, some trade news. Pete, what have you heard?
Not a lot. It's pretty quiet. I heard a bit of a whisper that we had been right into Adam Tomlinson, and I certainly last season, and we had that all but over the line, but something fell apart at the end.
Mm.
And then when he was dropped at the for that final last week, I thought, I wonder, But then I saw today that he appears close to striking a deal with Melbourne. So that may be one that we got close to that we weren't quite able to hook up. So I haven't heard a lot. There's the usual grumblings about our own side, of course, and the latest being Camillus Yeoman, and the fact that he's uncontracted. So that's if you read the papers or social media, you'd think that our whole club is exiting. So
well, not really. Not really. Let's have a look at it. We've had the two Crouch boys saying they want to stay. We've got Greenwood.
I know
you're exaggerating, but we may as well go through it. We've got the two Crouch boys that want to stay. We've got Hugh and Alex who would prefer to stay, but it doesn't look like they're going to be offered new deals, or deals anyway that they would be willing to take. We've got Eddie saying that he'd prefer to stay, but still speculation around his situation. Camillus Yeoman, as you mentioned, Pete, came out this week. Well, he didn't come out, but the media came out and said that he wants out. Source Jacobs Rumours of him going back to Carlton on a 2-year deal. GWS have also apparently thrown their hat in. Apparently, we've only offered a 1-year deal for Sauce. And I think in relation to Sauce, I think that's fair enough. I don't think he deserves any more than a 1-year deal, given his age and where he sits in the pecking order now. Have I missed anyone? I think that's it. Jake Kelly's been locked down.
Just to me, I think the fact that we might have Sauce on the 1-year deal is possibly why Hunter's heard he'd been told that he's not going to get another contract. And because with Strawn coming through and he's actually progressing, he's progressed quite nicely. So I think that leaves Strawn and Jacobs as their SNFL rucks. As
JJ's the other one.
Oh, JJ, of course. Yeah, who knows what the hell he's doing. But it seems unlikely that he'll be on the list next season. You know, plenty of banter in Victoria about us trading techs and all that. That's not going to happen. And, of course, we've got the retirements of Dougie and Andy Otten. So, I mean, there's a lot of players there. But by the same token, if that's what we end up losing, if we end up losing all of those players, it still probably doesn't represent the core of the team, and it does give us a fair amount of list spots to fill with tradies and or draftees. So it would represent a reasonable turnover at the list, wouldn't you think?
Oh yeah, I would think so. I mean, if most of those players that you're talking about, if they do end up exiting, and I think importantly, the age profile that they're clearing out, I think that's probably key to that, because even, you know, Keith and Greenwood are, 27, 28.
Yeah.
So you're really clearing out your over 30s or over 28s, if you want to put it like that. So I think that, that's a good thing. Certainly, I certainly didn't intend to express sort of concern because I think that it's a good thing, and I think we absolutely, we absolutely have to, turn the list over. And they're the kind of players, guys that are 27, 28, and that are trying to hang in for 3-4 year deals. I just don't think they're going to be offered.
Yeah. Do you think the Adelaide fan base, the silent majority of apricot slicers, are going to be happy with the fact that we're probably going to be bottom half dozen for probably the next 12 months at least, if the list gets turned it over to the extent that it looks like it will be?
I think that they will. I don't think that there's going to be, I don't think there's going to be any sort of great fall off because of that. And I think that, Nikki, I know that you went to the game on Sunday, and that's certainly a topic for discussion further on in the show. But a lot of exciting talent, and I'm not entirely convinced that putting some of that talent in the side is going to necessarily make us, bottom four, even though they're young. I think there's some real talent, and I think that, I know we've had this conversation before, but there are some players running around in the SANFL that should have been playing league football this year. And this business about, we wanted to keep, player A, B, C, and D, the experienced core, because there was a shot at finals. I think that we shot ourselves in the foot so badly, and I actually genuinely believe that we were a better shot at finals if we'd given some of these kids a go. I really do.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that, Pete.
And some of those players we've got in that SNFL, we've talked about before, that they fit into the spots where we've got issues. And if you just let them settle, but what it would mean was they would have to drop some of those more experienced players. And we know our club's been reluctant to do that with long-term servants of the club, and some little tweakings that would have had to be done. But I think we still have Ogilvy, who is the best talent spotter in the AFL, and that's acknowledged across the whole AFL. And what he did, particularly with our last draft, is he identified where we've got problems and he picked the right kids for those issues that we have. And I mean, and I think that's why they're playing off in a prelim final in the SANFL. They've proved at that level, and these are really skinny kids, in the most part, who more than hold their own against some very hardened bodies in the SANFL.
It makes you wonder about a possible disconnect between list management and coaching, because, you mentioned that Hamish has identified gaps in our list, but, I mean, to what extent does the coach have an input on that? And I don't think necessarily the coach needs to have a massive input on that. But if the list manager or the head of recruiting is viewing your list one way, and your coaching panel is viewing the list another way in terms of selection, that's where you seem to get this stagnation in the twos of a bunch of kids that a lot of people, including probably Hamish, is probably thinking, geez, why isn't he getting a run? And instead we continue to have this rewarding loyalty. And, in terms of a wider comment, I think that's actually one of the key things that the review is going to have to address, because I think part of the cultural issue down at Adelaide is the fact that they do reward service and loyalty and hard work. We've seen it with other players. We've seen it with blokes like Nathan Van Berlo and blokes like that who... David McKay, I'm sure, is another one who gets selected on the back of hard work on the track and loyalty to the club, etc., etc. Richie Douglas as well, I'm sure of that. And it's just not sustainable, and it's probably one of the things I hope that gets identified as being a bit of a flaw in the system down there.
Absolutely, but I guess in answer to your original question, Fiend, I just think that it'll be okay. I don't think the Slicers will jump off, because I still think that they'll, however the side is reconfigured, provided that and they may well yet trade in a little bit of talent, they will cut away a lot of the older players and the established players, as we discussed, and you've got, as I said, talent coming through. If they get 12th with a reinvigorated young side, you can sell that, and people will deal with that much better than dealing with guys that have been there for however many years and just producing the same result week in, week out, or year in, year out, I should say. So I think there's a year or two of patience there.
Yeah. Question without notice for both of you. It just occurred to me that we're probably looking to be a little bit more active than we are usually at the trade table. And we've got our recruiters and our scouts and all the rest of it, and Hamish heads all that up, and he's all across all the junior competitions, etc., etc. I wonder who, if anyone, is charged with the sole responsibility of looking at players from other clubs and earmarking players from other clubs currently on lists to go for, because surely it can't be Hamish, because he's spread a bit too thin, if that were the case.
No, he does. He does do that as well. They track other players that they've identified, and they track them over a number of years.
Yeah, that's from that's from the junior days, though, Nick. And I agree with you.
No. He has said that they did show on one of the Crow shows, I think it was last year, whatever, they showed it up, and they had names, and it wasn't just juniors, they also had current AFL players, so there were some that they were tracking.
You misunderstand me. What I mean to say is that they will track players that they've earmarked through the junior system. They will track them once they hit an AFL list. But what I'm talking about, so they will continue, like if they've identified half a dozen blokes in a draft and they haven't been able to pick them for whatever reason, they will continue to track those players to see whether there's an opportunity down the track to bring them into the Adelaide list. What I'm saying is, do they have a person that's dedicated to scout week in, week out opposition teams? Like, is there a bloke that is charged for looking at GWS, for example, to see how all that talent they've got hidden around, running around the NEFL is playing? surely that can't be Hamish. He hasn't got enough time, and it just seems to be a bit of a gap, I guess.
Would it be delegated to, as part of the role, that the various interstate, scouts that work for Hamish could their role be expanded, that, as well as, so let's say you're going to watch, 17, 18-year-old such and such who's playing in the NEFL, for example, but there might also be an older player that is, not getting a game for Sydney or whoever, that they can sort of do both. I don't know, but whether that's sustainable or possible, I'm not sure. But that would be the only. It's a good question, and I don't know the answer. But it would seem to me that if we've got a scouting network that is throughout the country, then I'm not sure that you'd then double up by then having a whole lot of other people watching. So you might watch. I'm trying to think of an example. You might watch an under-18. When do they play under-18s in the TAC Cup? Do they play it on a so you might go and watch a TAC game on a Saturday afternoon, because you're the Victorian-based scout. But then also you might get a message saying, actually, we also want to track, this person who's playing for whatever team in Melbourne, and so as part of his role, he watches a TAC game in Melbourne on Saturday, and then he goes to an AFL game on Sunday. That's how I would imagine it would work, at a guess.
I think from memory, listening to that podcast with Binook, that he talked about that. Yes, he's been doing some scouting work, so he can understand from that point of view, and Hamish has been getting him to do that. But he'd also been doing work regarding other, like, AFL listed players. I reckon there was a mention in there a little bit about him doing some of that stuff as well, because I know in terms of the trading, etc., that's Justin Reed's role, but Hamish, I do know, does do some background work for Reed in terms of that kind of stuff. That has been mentioned before. I know I've heard that done.
Yeah.
And Hamish is based in Melbourne with Reedy.
Yeah, well, I don't think Reedy does talent ID, but he certainly looks at the numbers, absolutely, and handles player managers and all the rest of it. What I'd like to do, and it's probably impossible, but it would be fascinating, I think, to compare our squad management talent identification system with that of, say, Hawthorn, who have a traditionally opposite approach. And seem to be able to identify players that are perfect gap fillers, and they've picked up blokes over the years that have done so well for them that in many cases unfashionable or on the outer in terms of their current clubs. And Ricky Henderson obviously springs to mind, but there's others. What's the name of that fullback from Western Bulldogs, the meathead? Won a couple of flags. What's his name again? Blokes in the chat, help me out.
I can't think of his name, but I know who you mean.
He got arrested recently.
I know who you mean.
You know what I'm talking about. But there's
Brian Lake.
That's it, Brian Lake. There's been a few like that they've been able to pull out, and it'll be very interesting to see whether their overall talent ID is weighted more heavily to current AFL listed players rather than juniors. I don't know. Anyway, and I mention that purely because I think we're at that part of our cycle where it'd be great to be able to identify a couple of 23, 24-year-olds that were just sort of second tier at their current club through one reason or another. It might be just an ill-timed injury, or just not the opportunities in their position that would be able to have a crack at. Similar position to Source Jacobs in the day.
I was just going to say, just to extrapolate on that kind of scenario that you're talking about there, Fiend, could it be that the reason why Hawthorn look at those type of players and are very happy to get rid of their first-round draft picks is that they know that their recruiters' strength is actually talent identification, of finding those players in other teams that fit into the system that they need at Hawthorn. It's why they've been so successful for that period. So I wonder whether that plays a little part of it, because we know Hamish is exceptional at that junior talent identification and ones that people don't think are going to be any good. He sees something in it and knows that, no, you just need to fix this or this, and that's where they kind of fit. And could be something like that.
I think the player that is on everybody's lips in terms of that kind of recruitment for this year, Fiend, is Bailey Williams, the Western Bulldogs.
Yeah.
South Australian lad who's pretty hard-running halfback midfielder, and I think played a bit of decent footy played a number of games with the Western Bulldogs, but I think that there's plenty of talk about him coming back to the Crows. That would be the kind of player that I imagine you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly right, Pete. And I'm sure he's not an isolated case. I mean, it's very easy to identify the Lukosius as, they're obvious. But it's those little diamonds in the rough that can serve a purpose and forge out a 200-game career playing a role. Most importantly, in the right age profile. And I think that's probably the key. I don't know. It's just the whole talent ID thing really fascinates me in AFL because I think it's at its embryonic stages, and I think Hawthorn, to me, are the standout just because they're not just following the accepted norms. They're actually out there doing what they feel they need to do in order to remain competitive, and it's worked for them. And the other one, Aaron Francis, looks like he's hanging around at Essendon, which is a little bit of a surprise.
Disappointing with that one. I was really hoping, and I'm still really, really angry that when he was open, when he was wanting to be traded back, that we couldn't get that done, and we were dicking around with Bryce Gibbs. But anyway, that's been and gone, and I don't think we'll get him now by the sounds of it. Certainly not this cycle. He'll sign for another 2 years, and I guess we see what happens after that. But the longer it goes, and can't see him coming back. I think we've missed the boat on that one, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think his best footy's ahead of him too, Francis. I think
absolutely,
he's
a very, very good player.
God, he's talented. He's so talented, and he just needed to get through a few things, and I reckon he's gotten through them now.
He's going to put together a season soon, and it's going to be special, and we're going to rue that one that got away. Did you want to have a talk about the SNFL? Nikki, I know you're at the game. Fiend, have we got any intro music for a game review, or should we just get crack straight in?
I've got a little bit of... Let me just find something here. Here we go. We're making it to the big time slowly but surely in the SANFL.
Nikki, you're at the game, so lead us away.
Well, I'll just say on that slightly mature age talent identification, we need to snap up Matthews before anybody else does, because that kid's got some talent.
Who was he?
Oh,
goodness me.
He's...
where the hell did he come from?
Oh, we've known him. He was one of those that uni had earmarked, but we just hadn't had the right mix to bring him in for the team. He's only played 4 games for us now, but he's actually performed very well at that level every time he's come in.
Where does he come from?
He's down McLaren Vale.
Okay.
One of those footy clubs down there. And he's got that burst of speed, but what I loved about him, particularly if you look at that goal that he kicked with the 2 bounces on the run, he keeps that speed going. He doesn't bounce until he has to do it, and just before he looks around to make sure he's got the space. It's just that little bit of composure of knowing exactly how far you've run, when you have to bounce, and if you need to kick it because they're too close in case the bounce gets stuffed up. It was an absolute superb goal, one of the 4 that he did kick, playing him on the wing. It's like, can we get him in our AFL team? That'd be nice.
He actually needs, I'm deadly serious, he needs to not play that well again.
Yeah.
They need to just pull him right back and just be, a no-name top-up player, thank you very much, and then just slide him under the rookie list, because if he keeps playing like that, he won't be available.
Very interestingly, we didn't nominate him for the SA Combine. and I think that was quite deliberate. We know exactly what we're going to get from him, and we don't want anybody else to see it. But I think there are other clubs sniffing around. He's got some very nice tricks up his sleeve. All the top-ups we've had this year, Uni has done an excellent job of picking top-up players that complement our team. And I think a lot of those could actually fit into an AFL system. Merritt down back at full forward. He's played very well all season, and he's freed up and allowed Butts to develop, not having to be the key fullback.
Who's the lad? The lad also the guy across half back from PAC. Who was? What was his? I can't remember his name now. He's been. You know who I mean, don't you? He's been
I do.
Fantastic as well. But you're right. There's been a few of them. But just in terms of, I guess, the guys that probably the listeners want to hear about, who really caught your eye on the weekend?
Oh, it had to be Scholl, didn't it?
Oh, did it what? Some of those passes, like that left foot kick, and it was at least a 40-metre pass off of his left, and he's a right footer, did not break stride. It's just like, yep, I need to kick this. And it was just a beautiful, I think there was a pass from right to him, and then him passing, I think, to Paholke at half forward, and not sure whether he kicked the goal or he had a shot on for goal at that stage. But it was just beautiful decision making that he takes. If anybody wants to have a bit of a giggle, the Crows podcast actually has him and Strawn on it today, and Duday and him have a bit of back and forth regarding the fact that Duday keeps trying to tell him that to defend you actually need to stand on your man, and Scholl seems to ignore that advice. But he does actually
ever stand on his man?
I know. That's why I said if you want to giggle, the fact that Tommy's actually giving that advice.
It's not only Scholl's kicking skills in general, but it's his balance and his decision making.
Yeah.
He's a ready-made AFL player, and he's another kid, I reckon, with a bit of nurturing. He's not a halfback flanker. He's a dead-set midfielder, in my opinion.
Yeah, he did talk about the fact that they've tried to play him on a wing for a little bit during the middle of the season, and he didn't like it as much. So they put him back to the back lines where he's a little bit more comfortable, but I think they know that there's that's possibly where he's going to get moved into, and that process is underway in terms of massaging him into the player he should be at AFL level. I'll also say Chase Jones only had 16 possessions, but what he does with those 16 possessions is pure class.
I actually thought he was really good, but I actually thought Gallucci was better. I thought Gallucci's game was excellent, and why he's out of favour or supposedly out of favour, I have no idea, because to me he's a ready-made 200-game midfielder.
What I really liked.
Oh, look, I've been on the Gallucci train for you know I've been on his train for a long time, and it's an endless source of frustration for me to see him playing the ones on on a half forward flank, and but even so, even the games that he has played, he doesn't get a lot of the football, but he gets such value.
Quality possessions.
Does such damage. Such damage with his possessions, and it just irritates the crap out of me that there is just for some reason he cannot get a go in our midfield. I just hope that the overhaul this year we'll see some of these a little bit more attention paid to these kids.
I'll just say on the Gallucci one, the television of his goal that he kicked from the pocket, which, I mean, the snap itself was outstanding, but what it doesn't show you is the movement he did. He knew exactly where that tap was going to come from, Strawn, and he started moving as the ball was going up. He knew Strawn was going to get it. He lost his player and he hit that outside at pace, and that tap went to him. And as he'd started to move, I actually turned to my dad and just went, "Gooch." And that was before he took it. You could just see something was going to happen and he was going to get it. Nobody else was getting that ball except him.
Nikki, I'm so glad you picked that up because, and I saw this when he played it in that showdown, not the final, but a number of weeks ago when they played at Alberton.
Yeah,
and he played midfield, and we had midfield minutes in between going back to the graveyard, even at Sanford level, but we had to find room for Gibson, Douglas, and the like. But when he did have midfield minutes, his capacity to read the ruck and actually and burst from stoppage and give God knows how many metres, because he hits the ball at pace exactly as you say at the clearance. He runs, he delivers long. I think he got about 6 or 8 clearances in that game. He was terrific, and there's just so much talent there that's just being wasted. It's very frustrating.
Yeah,
and we thought they were going to do it after we saw that Carlton game, the last game last year, and what he did, playing him in the midfield, and what he performed in that game, and showed all those tricks and that movement in the midfield. That's what I actually found really interesting was Uni and Paul Thomas's coaching in our midfield setups for this game. So we would start with Wilson, okay, that bigger body ball, Paholke, another clearance player, and Jones. There's your quick. Then they would swap and you would find Fogarty, Stengel, and Galucci, or McHenry going in there, or Boyle we're putting in from off the wing. He's going in. It was always such an interesting mix. But the fact that, in a do or die final, we're putting Fogarty and Stengel in as midfielders to win that ball. And they actually do quite decently.
Yeah.
Oh,
I
yeah.
thought Stengel was very good, actually.
Yeah.
Fog does well in the clearances.
Yeah.
No doubt about it. But yeah, I mean,
he was stupid as well, but that's Fog.
My last word on Galucci is that people have to understand he's a hybrid inside-outside midfielder.
Yep.
He's just as much an inside clearance player as he is. I think people get, they think that he's like an outside wingman or something. He's not. He's an inside midfielder that can run outside. So anyway, I just make that point. Nikki, just quickly, a player that really, really is beginning to interest me that I'd like a report on was Strawn.
Oh, love that ginger Bex.
Funny looking bloke, but some of the games I've seen him play, he's got the capacity to really clunk a contested mark. But he played a bit of key forward time in the early days, but I think he's running around in the ruck now. So what did you make of him?
So he started off primarily for the year mostly playing up forward because we had 2 rucks.
Well, and that's why Fogs played down back.
Yeah, and he also was coming back from a bit of an injury, so we were nursing him. And you're watching those early games, you kind of think he's not quite SNFL level. If we had a reserves team, that's where his level was at. And he slowly built, and it was the Centrals game that it kind of clicked in his head. And he took 3 great pack marks kicked 3 goals. He took some really brilliant pack marks. He's got that one grab clunk, which we've been missing. If you compare him to Himmelberg, that's Himmelberg's downfall, is he doesn't quite have that one clunker because, as my dad pointed out, Himmelberg marks with his arms directly straight up from his body, not slightly out in front. That's where Himmelberg has his problem. He needs to bring his arms that little bit forward and he'll probably get it better. But Himmelberg is brilliant at directing the ball down if he doesn't mark it. In the ruck, he was actually causing some problems for Balderstone. He's still skinny. He still gets, Strawn. He still gets pushed around a bit, but
how tall is he?
He's quite tall.
Is he 200?
Yeah, I reckon he looked taller than Balderstone, but that could also be the slimness. And he's got a really nice long arm, so really good reach. Did some really nice little taps, couple of different directions. Quite interesting that in all the SNFL finals, you always see Matty Clark out there working with them. And when they were doing the pre-game warm-up, Strawn was the one who was actually going first for the ruck, and then Hunter would come in as the secondary. During the game, we were we would play Hunter for 5 minutes in the ruck at the start, and then we'd play Strawn for the 10 minutes. So for the bulk of the quarter, we were using Strawn as our primary ruck, which I thought was quite interesting, and said to me that's where his development is at. Needs a bit more of a tank on him, but you can understand because he had the foot problem, didn't get to compete too well over pre-season and get that going in there. But he's played ruck against mature age bodies as well because he came from Essendon, Port Melbourne in the VFL. So he's just that little bit older.
204 centimetres, Pete.
204, thanks, mate. Well, that's a nice size, isn't it?
Yeah.
I've got a funny feeling that we might have a player there. I think he's certainly worth keeping an eye on.
Yeah, I think so. Hard to tell until they develop. So, like, I mean, how old is he? He's, what's that? 23? 23 next?
Okay.
Yeah, 23. So
Yeah.
you'd want him to come on reasonably soon, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, not bad. At the very least, probably develop into a serviceable backup for O'Brien over the next couple of years.
Yeah.
Other players,
that's what you need.
Yeah, the other players in the SNFL I thought did quite well. I thought Paholke played pretty well.
That's gone, I think.
Yeah, Ned was pretty good. Foggs was all right in patches, I thought. What do you think of McAdams' game?
The work that this doesn't show up on the TV, but the work that Himmelberg and Fogg do in that forward line as the three talls as such. We noticed it when Himmelberg was in the AFL, that the way he would work with Walker to create that space. Those three are natural forwards and know how to create the space for each other. McAdam is a very interesting one because he's got that nice little leap on him. You watch every pass to him, you think it's going to miss him, but then he just gets that little elevation, and they're kicked beautifully for him to mark at the highest point.
I need some intensity from McAdam, I reckon. If he's going to make it at the top level, he needs a little bit more intensity. It's all right being that laconic style, and that's, the indigenous
style.
The way
he looks.
Yeah.
He was chasing when it was being turned over. He was being the link man. I couldn't really I didn't see a fault so much in his game, where normally if you notice those forwards who don't follow up, and he was following up, but then he would drop back to always make sure that if we got the fast break, we had that one.
Yeah, I think it's more intensity in and around the contest. I think his work rate is okay defensively, but I don't know, just at times I just felt like he could put in an extra step or, just competed a little bit harder. Himmelberg, the one that you mentioned before, was really interesting because I've been watching Berg a little bit. And what you said about where he takes the ball overhead is exactly right, Nick. And what it results in is, and I don't know whether you guys have noticed this, but he's become quite flat-handed overhead. He doesn't seem to take the ball so much as the ball hits his flat hands. And I think that's why he's not actually taking a lot of marks at the moment.
Yeah, and it's as once Dad pointed out, and I watched it. Yeah, he does. It's the arms are very straight up. They just need to be that little bit more forward.
It certainly looks to me to be a
help.
technical issue because he makes great position, and he's massive, and he gets himself into really, really good positions to actually take those marks, and then it's just that final bit of execution that lets him down. So yeah, it does look to me to be a sort of a technical issue with the actual the take. Yeah,
and the ball doesn't go behind all that often, Pete, which seems to indicate to me anyway that he's so worried about keeping the ball in front of the pack that he's actually more worried about that than he is about taking the ball. And he's sort of blocking the ball rather than catching the ball. And if you look at his brother play, his brother is such a natural marker of the ball. He's got fantastic hands, Harry Himmelberg, and it seems that Easy is just maybe lacking a little bit of confidence and just has to. I think you're right, Nicky. His leap needs to be a little bit more angled forward, and he needs to get his hands forward. But more than anything else, I just think he needs to be concentrating on taking the ball rather than blocking the ball.
Well, that could be part of the problem if they're playing, in the backyard and Harry's always marking it. Poor Elliot didn't have a chance.
Oh, Elliot's about
Bit hard to
3 foot
learn.
high, taller than Harry. Harry's a bloody gun. I'd love to have him on our list.
He
He's
is.
one of my
Yeah,
favourite
he's a good
players.
player.
But so how do we feel about a potential Port Adelaide SANFL Grand Final?
It's definitely not what the SNFL would want.
No.
For me, I mean, it's great for those players because you're still busting your gut to play, and you want to win, and that desire to win would be a great thing. And it'd be nice to get a premiership for Andy before he retires, because even though you never quite get what you deserve, sport is not that way. It'll be nice. I think it's one that he would deserve a premiership. He's just that type of player. I would hope for me that it does that push to get an AFL reserves comp up and going. That for me, that's what I would see out of it. I know that if we do get through, Glenelg aren't going to be an easy prospect, although they did look slightly atrocious on the weekend, and they're going to be without McBean, and their forward line likes to play from behind, which I think definitely plays into AFL trained defenders' hands. There's definitely going to be more Port supporters there, and they will want the win. Whereas if I go along, it'll be, oh, okay. If we do, we do. Be nice to beat them, but it's not there.
I'm a bit different than that. I reckon if it's Adelaide Port, I don't want Port to be the first of the two clubs to win an AFL flag.
Oh, look, I would really like it, but it wouldn't be the end of the world as to what it would be for them. Although it is quite funny watching them walk around the SANFL finals wearing all their power gear, trying to explain. You don't want to stop them, explain to them that team's not playing.
I don't think they'll. SANFL certainly won't like it. I mean, I'm just pleased. Yeah, every quality game of and this is, I guess, this is really at the heart of the problem, isn't it? As a supporter, I'm just looking at it. I'm looking at that as a game and saying, look, what I'm really liking about this is it's yet another high pressure quality game of football finals that these kids get into them, and
yes.
as a team. Because interestingly, they've really, there's a real unit form there in that team. And I think that's largely on the back of there being such inflexible selection policies from above. But they're a real team. They're a real tight unit. And you can tell the way that they're playing, that they've played together all year. And they've had some consistency. And, and so I think, it's, would the premiership be great? Well, I guess, but really what I'm wanting is I'm looking at these kids as AFL players and wanting them to get this experience into their bodies. And so that's great. Now, really, that's, I guess it's not really the way you should be looking at a SANFL Grand Final. I don't know, but that's just the way that I look at it.
The only problem I can see is that it just delays the break for a lot of these young lads. And it's a long season for these first-year players, and it delays their break, which means it delays their return to pre-season training, etc., the flow-on effect. So, and given that we're hoping that some of these lads step up and become first 22 players over the next, 12 months, at times I kind of think, yes, the game experience is invaluable. But given the schedule and the step up to AFL level, I wonder the value sometimes.
It's a really, really good point that you make, and it's not something that I actually had front of my mind. And now that you make that point, I think it's a very, very valid one. And it's interesting because I wonder, the last time the Sandford team made a bit of a run at it a few years ago, I remember I actually went to the prelim final, and they just looked like that they weren't interested at all.
Yeah. And
it will be interesting to see this week whether, because they're obviously, every bit of their conditioning is being managed, and I'm just wondering, whether the club says, no, we're pulling the pin at this point. We don't need any more.
Yeah.
I think this is it. The very interesting thing was in that entire last quarter and the commentators and nobody else picked it up, but Hamill sat on the bench. He's not injured, but I think there was some management going on there that we we need him for next week. He's sitting out. He's the one that we leave some. Scholl had, I know, an extended period on the bench in that last quarter as well. So there was definitely some managing happening. But what was also interesting was when Norwood started to come back, that Uni actually came down to the bench and gave him a serve. So this from the coach wants to win. And
we'll find out. We'll find out this weekend, won't we?
Yeah, I definitely think those players do.
Yeah, it will be interesting because I think I was going to say something. We can't lose sight of the fact that it's a development squad. We can't lose sight of the fact that the primary or the sole purpose of having that team is that we can play our blokes together rather than spread them out across the SANFL, which allows us to develop them. And Pete, your point is well taken. Finals experience at any level, particularly, developing some sort of unity within the squad is invaluable. But as I said, I've already repeated myself. I worry about the knock-on effect for next season.
Yeah, that's a good point.
A couple of whispers just to finish off. Well, first of all, we need to congratulate Patrick Wilson on not winning the McGarry medal. 21
but
votes.
Luke Partington, though, very, very worthy winner.
Yeah, no doubt. There's a couple of games. Paddy didn't get anything, and I thought, geez, it's a bit rude. But 5 behind and 4 in front of the third place, Lewis Johnson, who I didn't even realise was still playing. So there you go.
What?
Good for Paddy.
Just on the game, once we heard Lewis Johnston was out, before that game, I just thought, Norwood have got no chance.
Yeah, they look cooked, actually. Didn't look switched on at all. So good for Paddy. There's a couple of whispers around about some Port players on the Crows' radar. I've heard Dougal Howard.
Yeah, I've heard that one.
I've heard, and someone, I think it was Vardy on the chat, mentioned, what's his name? Frampton?
Frampton's been whispers for a while.
What are they interested in Billy Frampton for? He's played one game in 5 years.
Yeah,
I know. I've got no idea why, unless I think it's he wants out.
Yeah, I'd be very keen on Howard, but I can't see them giving Howard up.
No, he's a terrific player.
Yeah, apparently there's some discontent there with Howard, but I think he'd cost too much, to be honest.
Very talented player. I'd love him on the list.
Yeah. So let's talk quickly about the AFL finals. No real surprises, I guess. The Brisbane-Richmond game was a good one, but Richmond ultimately too strong. We had the West Coast doing it pretty easy over there against the Bombers, and contrary to reports, Johnny Worsfold keeps his job. So it'll be interesting to see if Benny Rutten's on our assistant coaching list next year. The Bulldogs and the Giants, I thought the Giants played pretty well. The Cats and Collingwood. I thought Collingwood actually looked really good, Collingwood.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah, I'll just say on the Brisbane Richmond game, if they are going to continually try bomb the ball in high against that Richmond backline, you're never going to win that game. I was just watching that first quarter going, you need to hit that pass on a lead, not bomb it on Charlie's head, because no wonder Grimes is going to mop it up every single time. Yeah. It's the way Richmond have been defeating everybody else in finals, and the fact that they just couldn't switch it was, I thought, there's the second half capitulation coming in, and it happened.
No great surprises, Finn. I think Richmond, Collingwood, obviously, in the box seats, the only challenge to those two I can see is West Coast, and I think, and for me, Brisbane, I'm not 100% sure about. I've got a funny feeling GWS might give a good account of themselves this weekend, and I wonder whether, I mean, they've been finals for a few years now, GWS. I just wonder if maybe there's a little bit of steel in them this year. But I've said that before.
Yeah.
So they're hard to read, aren't they?
They are, and we've been saying that a couple of times where games that you expected them to really grit the teeth and pull through, they've kind of let us down. But we are, I mean, I think they'll account for the Lions. I think the Lions are a year away at least. A couple of players a bit down. I thought one of the reasons, I think, Nicky, that their tactics early failed was because Hipwood just didn't have any influence on the game.
He actually hasn't done a lot this year. I've been very disappointed.
Yeah.
With
Kick 5
Hipwood.
against us.
Yeah, well.
But that's against us. But overall, because I've watched a lot of Brisbane games this year because they've been quite enjoyable to watch. But he seems to have that aggro, want to throw his weight around when he doesn't have the weight, and he seems to me more a player that wants it on his terms, a bit like Jenkins. And if he doesn't get it, there's a bit of a dummy spit going on.
Yeah.
And
well, they need him to step up. If they're gonna go any deeper, they need him to step up against the Giants.
Because you contrast that with GWS, with Cameron coming back in, and Cameron didn't seem to do a lot.
Oh.
But what he does is he takes that attention,
allows
the others to come into the play. He does. And I remember watching in the last quarter, and the commentators are talking about Harry Himmelberg, going, "Oh, he hasn't done a lot today." And I actually yelled at the television, like, "Are you kidding me? Have you not watched the space and the work that he's done off the ball for those other forwards?" There's actually quite an unselfish forward line at GWS.
Yeah, the one that I really like for GWS is it Haynes, the defender?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good player.
Bloody good play. Played really well, I thought, against the Bulldogs. And he's real key for them. He's got a bit of something. I'm a bit with you. I wouldn't mind GWS sneaking through, actually, Pete. It wouldn't surprise me in the slightest. I think they'll account for Brisbane. And they just, I don't know, there's a little bit of a different air about them this season, or this finals campaign, I guess you'd say.
So if they get through, now do they cross over to Collingwood if they get through, and then West Coast play Richmond? Do I read that? Is that correct?
Let me just.
I think that's the way it works. I'm pretty sure that's how it works.
Because if they do, I think GWS, if they play to that steel that we've seen them do, they're the ones who actually trouble Richmond.
If GWS and West Coast win, then it'll be Richmond, West Coast, and Collingwood, GWS in the prelims.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah. So interesting.
Yep.
I think that's what it'll be.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so too. I don't see Brisbane getting up. I think they've done fantastically well this year, Brisbane, but they're probably a year or two away from it. And I think the Cats stink. They're on the nose.
Yeah.
Cats.
Yep.
So
I agree.
Yeah. All right. Well, look, I reckon we're just about done. We've done pretty well to fill that out. Yeah. Thanks to everyone on Spreaker Chat and also on Facebook and YouTube who have been listening in and providing their comments. Thanks, as always, to Ryan at Smith Partners Real Estate, massive supporters of the CrowCast, and we're very thankful for their ongoing support. Also, the lads down at Down to Earth Electrical for all your electrical data and air conditioning needs. Get Around Scorpus's YouTube channel, Hardware on Box, for all your tech news and reviews. And lastly, but certainly not least, thank you to all of our patrons on Patreon. If you want to support us on Patreon, go to aflcrowcast.com and click the orange button, or go to patreon.com/AFLCrowcast and do your thing there. Still didn't get any word from Shuttleworth or any reply from the club at all about our petition, which I thought was particularly disappointing. I wouldn't be holding my breath now for that, but I guess we could say mission accomplished in that regard. So, you know, that one can continue. Obviously, no weekend wrap again, but we will have Tuesday Night Live again next week, talking about the second round of the finals. Until then, Nikki, Pete, thanks very much for joining us tonight.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you for hosting us.
My pleasure. Hopefully we'll have Macca and Donkey back on deck next week. Until then, thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Cheers. Bye.
Night all.